about anything of that sort at all, but he was really excited about it, really interested. And ultimately, by the time he left Toronto, he was quite an accomplished pastry chef. So off he goes to the Nickel Range. I'll skip a little bit here. And Alex, once he grew up, spent an inordinate amount of time in his father's kitchen. His father, by the way, had left the pastry chef business and became one of the co-head chefs of the premier hotel in the Nickel Range in Sudbury. So Alex, his father would get up early, go to work, do breakfast, fix lunch, get lunch ready, come home after lunch for a nap, and then go back to do dinner. So his father was leaving at 6 in the morning, not getting back really until about 8:30 at night. So if Alex wanted to see his father, whom he liked very much, he had to go and spend time with him at the hotel in the kitchen. So he got to run the big mixer and the big dishwasher. He made himself useful by serving the sides at banquets and cutting the sheet cake at weddings. And I thought this was really kind of clever. His father, remember, he was a pastry chef, would do the wedding cakes for these things. And so Alex's job was to go find all the little canisters, all the little Kodak film canisters that he could. Remember those little film canisters? And his father would frost them and use them as stilts for the various layers of the cake. That kind of ingenuity always impresses me. So he learned, aside from frosting Kodak canisters, he learned the importance of punctuality. He learned that there was the reward of hard work, honest work, the pride of properly arranging tables. I say, yes, there's nothing nicer than a properly arranged table. And he also learned the camaraderie in the kitchen between the cooks and the waitresses. Although one time, one of the meat cutters was very annoyed with one of the waitresses and he threw a knife at her, missed her, and ultimately they made up. And I thought, oh my, I can only imagine what went along with that. In any event, he didn't learn so much about cooking there, although he did ask his father one time how to make a chocolate cake. He wanted to make his mother a chocolate cake. And his father said, well, you start with 2 dozen eggs. No, I just want to make a little cake for mom only. So they figured it out, and the cake turned out pretty well, apparently. In any event, he had a good relationship with his mother and father and his younger sister. He was 7, Barbara was 5. He came upon Barbara and her friends playing near a partially frozen river, and he chastised them and decided he would test the ice for them. So of course he fell in and ended up coming up on the other side of the river. He was rescued by a rail worker, but that meant he had to walk all the way around over the bridge to get back home. By that time, he was practically frozen to death. And that was the beginning of a 12-year stint with rheumatism behind his knees. So he would wake up in the middle of the night crying, and his mother or father would come into the bedroom and rub his knees with Sloan's liniment. I have no idea what Sloan's liniment is, but at least it worked. He said after 12 years, all of a sudden it stopped. Poof, go figure. The answer is riding a stationary pony. Before we got that first house, we lived for a few years in Toronto. My dad had gone back to work at the King Edward Hotel to save for the down payment for a home. In Toronto, my parents had a ton of Ukrainian, Russian, and Polish friends, and that made for some great celebrations, I can just imagine. On Sundays, everyone came over to our place, a 3-story rented house with an in-ground gas pump in the backyard. I haven't thought about that gas pump in forever. Why do I remember that all of a sudden? We hosted because everyone else lived in apartments. There were lavish spreads of herring, dill pickles, cabbage rolls, and of course, schnapps and vodka. Around the third glass of vodka, Dad would bring out his violin and start playing jigs. Poor Barbara went to the dining table once, wanting a glass of water. You can see where this is going. She grabbed a glass that looked like it contained water. It contained vodka. She sucked that up and then started screaming. I can only imagine. That house was where another of my life's many injuries and ailments occurred. I made myself a parachute, and I decided to try it out by jumping off the roof of the front balcony. How else are you going to try out a parachute? Jump from a park bench? No, you have to jump from a high place. A lot of people think I'm pretty sharp as the host of Jeopardy, but when I look back on my life, I did plenty of stupid things. Fortunately, that time I just got a little bruised, messed up my knee a bit. So there must have been fun times around Alex, even then. So then it's time for school. He was a good student, as you might imagine, and enjoyed going to school. But his best friend, whose father owned the hotel where his father worked, was going to a Catholic boarding school. They were all Catholic. And he would come home on breaks and go on about how wonderful it was and how much fun he had and so on and so forth. And so Alex wanted to go there too. They had no money, but somehow they got together, got the money to send him to this boarding school for 1 year. So off he went. And then he ran into problems. My parents were two of the nicest people you'd ever run into. Easygoing. I never met anybody who said they didn't like my mother or my father. They were just sweet people. They got along with everybody. They were kind. They were generous to the extent that they could be generous. They never badmouthed anybody. I mentioned earlier that my parents cared deeply for each other, but they were ill-suited. My dad was a smoker and a heavy drinker. Mom was a teetotaler and brighter than he was. Divorce was almost unheard of in our community, but they separated, which caused me no end of grief. Somehow I thought it was my fault because they had been forced to marry. Yes, he was unexpected. I had been dealt a bad turn. I thought, I'm going to have to stand up for myself. So I began acting out. That didn't serve me well at the University of Ottawa Prep School. I was unruly, so unruly they were going to throw me out after my first year. But his father decided he could go back that summer. His dad and he went back to Ottawa, a 250-mile trip. In those days, no small excursion. He drove his new 1956 Ford Fairlane, which was the only car he could afford. And basically, on bended knee, we begged the principal to be allowed to come back. There were about 220 boarding students. And the younger boys were with Father Roy, who had been Alex's nemesis. So he got assigned with the older boys, with Father Dugas. He said he'd take a chance on me, and I never gave him a cause to regret that decision. And he subsequently did very well. So he had good experiences. He was an altar server, which got him special privileges. They got to go first in line at the commissary. They got to go out to movies on occasion. They had a small 18-person dorm. So he knew what he was doing. Although he just mentioned that at one time he served 2 masses at the same time. And I can't for the life of me figure out how that could possibly be done, but he said he did it. And he particularly liked serving with this one priest he called Big John, because he could do the mass in 12 minutes. I can't figure that out either, but in any event, that was back in the day. So it was at one point he came home on vacation, and this is after his parents had split up, and his father was trying to move a sofa from one room to another in the place where he was living. And he asked Alex if he'd help him. And of course, Alex said he would. We tried to move the sofa, but it was too wide to go through the doorway. We stood it on the end and tried to twist it in, but it was too deep to go through the doorway. We were going crazy. We were there half an hour at this, trying to get this through the door. Just then, Evelyn, one of his neighbors, also happened to be the head waitress at the restaurant, walked by, took a quick look, and said, well, why don't you open the sofa into a bed? So we did. We made it flat, stood it up on its edge, and slid easily through the doorway. No problem at all. My dad was pissed as all get out. It was as if his manhood had been attacked. And I thought, holy smoke, she's brilliant. Women are smart. And that little incident colored my view of women from that day forward. I never underestimated women after that. Then, after he finally gets out of school, he decides he wants to go to military college, because he went through they didn't call it the ROTC, it was the ROTP, regular officer training program. And similar to here in this country, they would pay for 4 years of college. You gave them 2 years of service, and there you were, no college bills. So he figured, okay, he'd go. So he took the test. They did very well, and so he was assigned to go to military college. However, he did not want to go to the college they wanted to send him to. He hadn't planned on that. He wanted to go to the University of Ottawa, where his girlfriend was, but no, he was sent far, far away. So that didn't start out well. Then they had to make their bed. In the typical story, they had to bounce a coin off of it. So he made his bed perfectly, and then he had to tear it apart. And Alex did not like that very much. So he got pretty sassy and had to do 20 push-ups and make the bed over anyway. So he figured, okay, he can suck it up. But then he had to get his hair done. He was not getting his gorgeous hair cut off. No way. That was a deal breaker. So he went to the commandant or the commander or whoever and said, I can't do this. Went home to Dad, and some kids might worry about what Dad would say when they got home after all of that. But remember, he was going to get a free ride. Well, Dad said, gave him a big hug, said, don't worry, it'll all work out, Sonny. And it did. Then he went to a grade 13, and they called it grade 13 apparently. It was a matriculation year, but it was the equivalent of 1 year of college, first year of college. But this was at his old high school. So he went to that, did well. But this I thought was really very telling. At graduation, this is after grade 13, my homeroom teacher, Kenny Gardner, took me aside. Kenny had once told students in another class, there's a kid in my homeroom, sits at the back of the class, doesn't say a word, but in discussions, if the students are ever stumped and can't come up with the answer to a question, I'll point to him and he gives me the correct response. He's just a good student, well behaved. That had gotten back to me, and it meant a lot because I was mostly known for joking around in class, though never in a destructive way, except at the Catholic boarding school. Years later, when I started hosting game shows, he did game shows before he did his quiz show. Those words could take on added significance. Yet something Kenny told me that day at graduation would have an even greater impact on me. He said, Alex, you've had a good year. Do me a favor. Never lose your love for life. I was just torn apart by that line because somebody had finally recognized what I thought I was about. Very touching. Well, then he did finally get started in proper college. And what to do? Well, he was going to he decided he'd major in philosophy. That seemed like a good thing that would be useful. And he didn't know what else he wanted to do. But in particular, well, I'll let you tell it. I majored in philosophy, specific Thomistic philosophy, based on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. We studied ethics and metaphysics. I did not choose this major because I was a brooding teenager plagued by existential quandaries. I chose it out of convenience. These classes were from 9 to noon and allowed me to work in the afternoon and evenings in order to pay for school. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated, and philosophy seemed like a good subject to pursue until I figured out where I was and what I wanted to do with my life. I'm glad I studied philosophy. I think that a philosophical outlook will help you no matter what you are doing. Philosophy gives you, in terms of acknowledging some sense of perspective in your life and in the world around you. I've always tried to approach life with what I call the reasonable man attitude. If you have some sense of perspective, you're not likely to get too high or too low. Well, college got to be a little bit of a drag, and he liked his jobs a lot better than he liked the jobs just for school. He was working at a radio station, ultimately got into some TV, and went from one job to the next, never said no. Somebody advised him to never say no if he had a job opportunity, and he didn't. So he worked constantly, each time learning more things about the business, and also making connections with people. And just like he was on TV for Jeopardy, you may have already picked it up, Alex was a nice person, a nice guy, reliable, bright. Who wouldn't want to hire him? But eventually, it's like people think people have been successful overnight. No. This is over the course of 10 years. He developed, just like Malcolm Gladwell says, you have to have 10,000 hours of experience in order to be an expert in anything. And he certainly got his 10,000 hours. At one point, however, and he's constantly learning things that he put to good use in Jeopardy. He was coaching a girls' basketball team. He was working on a show called Reach for the Top, not totally unlike Jeopardy. And he always tried to be encouraging and positive. I do the same thing to this day on Jeopardy. If you watch the show on a regular basis, you notice that often when a contestant guesses wrong, I'll say gently, "Oh, you were so close. You were probably thinking of," or I'll say, "You were just a few letters off." An easy mistake. I want to keep them from getting down on themselves and going into a funk for 2 or 3 minutes and falling completely out of the game. During a taping, just the other day, in fact, we had a contestant who got himself in the red real fast. He was negative $2,300. And I just said a couple of encouraging things, and all of a sudden in Double Jeopardy, he turned it around. By the end of Double Jeopardy, he was right up there and vying for a win. Don't worry about it. Just look ahead to the next question. You didn't get here by accident. You passed the test. You deserve to be here. These categories maybe don't line up with your areas of expertise, but you're bright. Keep your head up, move forward, keep going. And that was his approach to life as well. At one point, he had a number of jobs. At one point, he was a MC for a centennial program that Canada was having. And since he was the only bilingual, he was both French and English, bilingual announcer, they used him for obvious reasons. Well, there were a whole lot of singers and dancers and so on and so forth, but at the end of the show, all the singers and dancers and so on lined up in front of the stage, and the guest of honor, none other than Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, would come along and greet them. As the host, I was at the end of the show. The Queen got to me and said, Good show. Please tell me your name and where you're from. As I began answering her, I couldn't help but notice that she glanced over her shoulder just for a second to see where Prince Philip was. Now, normally in public, the Queen has Prince Philip just 2 steps behind her, and she will not leave the stage until he is accompanying her. Only this time, he wasn't 1 or 2 steps behind her. He was 50 feet behind her, talking to this group of 20-year-old blonde girls in sapphire blue leotards. You're not supposed to have a conversation with the Queen, but she was stuck talking to me for 4 or 5 minutes. I was hosting the Triple Crown of Racing, so we spent much of our discussion on that. After several minutes of conversation, Prince Philip showed up, said, "Good show," took my hand, and off they went. The next night, same thing. And so he's thinking, well, here comes my new best friend. The Queen gets to him. He stood a little taller, his chest welled up, and he smiled, and then she got to him and said, "Good show. Please tell me your name and where you're from." A lesson in humility, to be sure. It was quite the perfect kid, the perfect guy. Well, people like that don't fit in real well. He was had the world by the tail. He was a talented newcomer in broadcasting. He was a bright, fair-haired boy, good at his job, didn't drink, smoke, didn't do drugs. There were no big negatives associated with him. And that caused him problems because he couldn't be one of the group. So he took up cursing. And he added curse words into every sentence that he could think of. Well, fortunately, that didn't work too well for him either, and it just made him look like a jerk. I thought that was a pretty important lesson that he learned. I would have hoped that some of my former students could have learned that lesson as well. One thing there are a couple of things I want to talk about that you might not know about Alex. He was making a good salary, a good bit of money. And oh, by the way, he decided he didn't want to go into acting because you had to work too hard. His job required him to work 2 very long days. And that was it. They taped 5 shows at a time. So, life was good. He had the rest of the time to spend with his family and his kids, which he enjoyed very, very much. But at one point, he was chatting with Carol Lawrence. I don't know if you remember her or not, successful actress. And she was doing some work with a humanitarian organization called World Vision. And he said, well, if there's anything that I can do to help or whatever, let me know. And they called, and he spent a great deal of time working with World Vision that was in the mid-'80s, and continued that involvement all through his life. It was interesting, though, he made a dozen international trips, most of them to Africa. I've been to Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and South Africa. When I first went to Africa, I immediately felt at a visceral level, this is home. This is where I come from. I belong here. He says, I feel that every time I go there. I feel it in my gut. He said, there's just something about it. I stand in Africa and I say, I'm home. I thought that was quite interesting. He talks about one woman came up to him and handed him her child, wanted to give it, wanted her to keep him because she was worried that she couldn't care for him. And then another occasion, a little boy came up to him and he picked him up and they walked around for a little bit, and then he went to put him down, and the little boy started crying inconsolably, and he couldn't understand why that was. And he said, what did I do? And the person he was with said, they have so little physical contact with human beings that once you pick them up, they don't want to let go. They feel so loved and warm, they don't want to lose that. We really have a lot to be grateful for. this may be, he's kept politics out of the show religiously. But I felt it felt important to add this, or to tell this to you. If you start off saying, here's the way we're going to solve it, and another person says, maybe you could try to solve it this way. Well, which manner do you think is more likely to work? The one that allows for doubt, or the one that begins with absolute certainty? He says, always trust the one who's doubtful, who has the doubt. And what we need more love, obviously, but what we need is conscience in the business community and in politics. Yeah, he skips over that very lightly. Do you know what a muskox is? I had no idea what a muskox was. In fact, I'd never even seen a picture of one. The book, by the way, has many wonderful pictures. Well, it turns out that the muskox is Alex's, or was, I never know what tense to use, Alex's favorite animal. And that was another charitable cause that he'd been involved with, the protection of the muskox. That's because when they are threatened, and their main threat is from wolves up north, they form a circle with the calves and the cows in the middle, and all the males facing outward, so that their horns are projecting toward their enemy. That's how they protect the herd against attacks. No wolves can break that circle, unless some poor muskox in the circle decides he's going to start running. Once one ox starts to run, they all run. And when they're running, they're very vulnerable. Then the wolves can focus in on one and bring him down. But so long as they're committed to the circle, it's impenetrable. So long as they stand together, they are safe. There's a message there. So that's why the muskox has always touched him. He went in on a winery, and the winery failed, and he lost a good deal of money, but he ended up buying the property next door, which was a 7,000-acre horse ranch. This is in Northern California. And he didn't know anything about horses, so after the manager left, he had to move that away as well. I'm surprised that he didn't get into the wine business. He had a fascination for luxury cars. In fact, he bought this was again in the early 80s, he bought a 56 Bentley convertible. And when he went to the studio lot, he always tried to park as close as he could to Jay Leno, because of course, Jay Leno has this affinity for cars, and he was sure that he could make a connection with Jay Leno that way. He doesn't develop that idea, so I don't know if he did necessarily or not, but he's eventually had to sell the car to buy a house, because after he and his first wife divorced, he gave her the house, so he needed to have money for another house, so he sold the poor Bentley. He philosophizes on why, some of the reasons why Jeopardy was so successful. And I've already talked about some of those, but one was comfort. He was comfortable to be with. The viewers feel they were getting value from the show. They were learning something. It was a long-running habit, something to say for ritual. By the way, Jeopardy always precedes Wheel of Fortune. Initially, Wheel of Fortune was the successful show, and Jeopardy was kind of limping along a little bit. But they had to put something with Wheel of Fortune to make the hour block. So Jeopardy was going to fit in there. And then Alex and Pat Sajak traveled around, I suppose, Vanna was with them, and they went all around and they were publicizing Wheel of Fortune, but also Jeopardy. But I think that connection kind of had a synergistic effect, and ultimately, I don't know about you, but I watched Jeopardy and then the heck with Wheel of Fortune. But he quite liked that. And he talks about how his mother doesn't want him to call between 7 and 7:30. Pardon me, because of course that's when Jeopardy is on. Or sometimes people in the audience would say, well, we have dinner with you every night. So even though it may seem like they were an overnight sensation, and this is often the way we think that these stars and programs and so on started off at the top of their game, and that's not at all the case. Well, a couple things. In 2007, I was interviewed by the Television Academy about my career. One of the questions they asked me was, what is your proudest personal and professional achievement? I told them I have no idea. When I received the Order of Canada, I was very moved, in part because of the other people who were receiving the award at the same time. They weren't just entertainers. It was an impressive group, but I never thought about my life in those terms. I just enjoy the moment I'm in. For me, life is a whole experience, not just a series of isolated moments. It's like submerging yourself in a warm bath rather than sticking your toe under the faucet. It's the totality of life, the warm bath philosophy. So I'll leave you with that. I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Anybody have comments or questions? Let us know in the chat. We'll unmute you. I have to say that Zoom seems to be restraining people. When we used to meet in person, there were always plenty of comments, so please feel free.
I remember that. If you're wondering why I didn't mention his cancer, it's that he has some very, very poignant personal comments about his cancer diagnosis and dealing with it, and his wife and kids dealing with it and so forth. But I left that out. But that's a good part of the book as well. A wonderful book.
Anybody? Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, so Lisa Derrickson said we should note that Alex's final show just aired last Friday, and that there was a moving tribute.
And well deserved. Ken Jennings is the guest host for now. And I don't know if you know, but shoot, who's the quarterback in the Green Bay Packers?
Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers.
In any event, he's going to follow Ken Jennings as host of Jeopardy. Choose, what's the name of that guy?
Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, can you unmute Judy Garrett? She's trying to talk.
The quarterback for Green Bay is Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback's name who's going to follow Ken Jennings. I can't fathom that, but hey, maybe he's looking for a second career.
Well, if there are no questions or comments, thank you, Judy. I think you've probably tempted a lot of people to read this book.
Well, I hope so. It's worth their time.
And thanks for being willing to join us again as a presenter.
My pleasure.
To everybody, we are not meeting next week. Our next meeting will be the 27th. That's 2 weeks from today. Dawn White will present White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. I'm really hoping you get over your reticence before then, because I think we need to have a conversation about that one. Please stay tuned for the Friends annual meeting, which will start at 1-ish. And we hope to see you at the next presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
You have the talking on? Do you have it unmuted?
Can we talk now? Or does it still have to go through chat?
Yeah, you can talk.
I don't know.
I think we can talk now. We hear you.
Okay, good. Judy, I don't know how to do chat, so I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing it. I looked over here, but I still don't understand how to do chat. So.
Thank you, Margot.
Thank you, Judy.
So who do you think will be the long-term host?
I don't think they're going to make that decision for a long time. But I worry because Alex was there for so long and was so
Beloved.
loved and so phenomenal at it, that he'll obviously be hard to replace. I mean, that's obvious. But I worry because sometimes when that happens, you can never find somebody who measures up, and then the show just. So I think perhaps the only way they can keep it going, at least for a while, is to keep having these very interesting subs like Aaron Rodgers, who, whatever, you know.
Can't imagine.
I
Yeah.
thought Ken Jennings is doing a very fine job.
In any event, they may just carry on with the subs for a while to keep the interest up. Remember, initially, you could only be on Jeopardy 5 days.
Right.
And that was Alex who said, you know, if we let people go a little longer, they might have, we might be able to build the audience and build the interest. And I don't know if you were at Ken Jennings, but that was, I changed my rehearsal schedule so I could watch Ken Jennings. And,
You don't think he's doing well?
they're worried that, he would be, they would get somebody on there that was unpleasant or awful or nobody wanted to see, and it would be the ruination of the show. But I think actually Alex was right. It did certainly bump up the popularity and long-term success of it.
And how about a female?
What?
How about a female?
I can't hear Judy.
No, that was Margot. How about a female?
Oh, that'd be interesting.
I had heard that Katie Couric is.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Oh, I have to go now.